What do you think?
I think something's working.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, thank you, Summer, and thank you everyone for coming in, Zooming all in together. Today's March 11th, 2021, and it is 6:21 p.m. We're going to go ahead and get started with our part 2 of our Moab City Council strategic planning. And on today's agenda, we basically have our continued development of City Council priorities for 2021 and 2022 as a discussion. We've got 4 subtopics: infrastructure, water resources, sustainability, and budget. And as we all saw on our agendas, time is allotted for each. And so I will be holding us to those allotted time limits. So if you are in mid-sentence, just like yesterday, finish your sentence and then we're going to move on. And thanks for yesterday's meeting. Everyone was really concise. So let's continue that effort for tonight's meeting. And as we can see also, we don't have time at the end of this meeting to sort of hit topics we haven't talked about or haven't had enough time to talk about. And so what I would just like to say is that if there are topics that we want to deep dive into and we don't have time for tonight, what we are going to want to do is just plan for that. And so we will put that on a future agenda. So if at any time you feel like there's not enough time for something, we will stick it on a future agenda. But otherwise, is everybody okay with the time limit set and the agenda as is? Okay, then we will go ahead and get started. And Summer, can I just check in with you really quickly too before we get started and make sure I see that we are recording and we're streaming to YouTube as the Planning Commission meeting also? Is there any problems on that end?
I still see Planning Commission going. I'm going to just pull up our YouTube channel and make sure we're
okay. Well, will you just stop me and let me know if we've got any problems?
Will do.
Okay, awesome. All right, well, everyone, let us continue. Infrastructure is the first item on our agenda, and sidewalk plan. So I guess what I could do is kick us off here in this discussion. Myself, Mike, and Kaylin met, I don't know how long ago. Do either of you remember the date of that meeting? No. I know in coronavirus year, it's hard to target, but I do have the working map where we began to delineate regions. And Mike also put together a PowerPoint presentation. So I just want to kick this ball over to the two of you to make sure we're all on the same page of where we are in terms of the sidewalk inventory work that the council agreed to do. And then we would bring back to staff what our direction would be. Well, the three of us were going to workshop it, bring it back to council, and then as council, we'd bring it direction to staff. Is that what you both recall, what we all recall? Yeah. And so then do you want to sort of summarize the mapping that we did for the council?
Sure, I'd be pleased to, unless Kaylin wants to go first.
Well, I was thinking maybe you could present the mapping. I have a little bit of a different idea about how to handle sidewalks via impact fees. But
the funding mechanism of them.
Well, the funding mechanism, but also how, right. I mean, it seems like we started with the sidewalk mapping, which I thought was a very useful exercise and may well still be, but I'd like to talk about a different way to skin that cat when the time is right.
Hey, no cat skinning. This is a violent free zone. No, I'm just kidding. Well, as you can see, we have this map, and I'm not sure if you really can see details, but the idea was to put it into, that's okay. You don't have to see details tonight because this is kind of a higher level conversation about it. But the idea was that we were going to map it out into a more readable format than paper and markers, and then present it to this council. So, but I will just quickly say what we did was we kind of delineated zones. So chunking out, like, for example, this area of town here, this R3 area, we all agreed that that's a more densely trafficked area and more walkability. And so we didn't feel, as in our working group, that we would want to not continue to require sidewalks in this area. So just for example, this one area, we would, in the R3, we would continue to require sidewalks. But we kind of looked at different zones and talked about, did kind of a layer of requirement. And then we also, as Kaylin, you were just talking about, talked about a mechanism for funding, right? Sidewalk.
Can one of you just take a minute to, for people who don't know what the sidewalk inventory or plan is, just introduce kind of why you looked at sidewalks, just in 1 or 2 sentences, just for people who don't have context for this conversation.
Mike, you want to do that?
Yeah, let me see if I can give you guys an introduction. That's a great question. So this all got started several years ago, actually. I'm in an area, for example, that does not have sidewalks up and down our streets. And when the question of somebody wanted to subdivide their lot, I did it one time, wanted to do mine, for example. I ran into all kinds of inconsistencies in the way the city planning staff and design review team handled it, and found out that sidewalks have been required in the city everywhere for quite some time, but it's been quite irregularly enforced. So with the aid of the map that Chuck made, which is a great map, great map, I went around town just looking to see where sidewalks really should belong and where they shouldn't. And as you might guess, in the downtown areas and where there's high traffic areas, is places where sidewalks definitely should be. There are other places in more remote part of towns and narrower streets and so forth where sidewalks are not presently there, and the neighbors by and large seem to like their neighborhood the way it was. So what I did was, with the aid, again, went around to, I don't know, 20 some odd, 30 some odd different blocks. I'll call them blocks. I'm talking about a side of a street now in a particular block between 2 cross streets that does or does not have sidewalks, or in particular that did not have sidewalks, and kind of looked at it objectively to see what sort of rationale should be made for either requiring sidewalks there, as city ordinance actually specifies, or whether or not just to simply let it go the way it is, and kind of take that burden off and take it out of a design review team's hands. So I actually went around with a camera in hand, took a lot of pictures, and came up with a quantitative, what would we call it? Not scorecard. What's the magic word people use?
Ranking?
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, ranking.
Ranking, and unfortunately, Emily, forgive me because I'm not prepared. I could have had this all in front of me and summarize a long story. Anyway, so I'll just have to talk about it rather than show you on the screen. But so I did rank all the unsidewalked areas in town, and of 30 or so, there were maybe a third of those that looked, in my opinion, could certainly remain in that state for a variety of reasons, because they added up that way in quantitative criteria, and others were clearly they should be sidewalked at some point. And that's kind of where it sits right now. I'm trying to get away from the notion that sidewalks have to be everywhere, because there's places where residents seem to really genuinely enjoy their kind of rural look, where water drainage wasn't a problem and so forth. So that was the idea. And from that quantitative listing, we can look at pictures and make amends to it. But anyway, that was, as Kaylin says, that's kind of where I started, and that's kind of where it still sits right now.
Right. And if I may, one thing that we spent some time talking about was for areas, well, one factor is that even on higher volume streets where there may be a desire for more pedestrian or bike amenities, requiring sidewalks may still be unpopular, and there may be enough curb to curb pavement that we could potentially reprioritize. Like maybe we don't actually need parking on both sides of the street in all sections. And so there may be streets where could have parking on one side of the street and then provide the pedestrian and bike amenities on the other within the existing curbs. So one thing that struck me as we were doing this is that even exempting some streets from having to build sidewalks, they'll still tend to be developed in a piecemeal fashion as lots by and large redevelop, which isn't necessarily the ideal way to build out a transportation network, because we'll likely have discontinuous chunks of sidewalk for decades. And so the way we normally build infrastructure is we do it as a city or a community where we have a prioritized list of segments that get built out as a whole, and they're funded via some common funding technique and possibly an impact fee. And I've talked to Joel about this a little bit. A transportation impact fee is something that the city could be assessing, but it's not. You do need a master plan or some sort of plan. You can't just assess fees generally. They have to be for designated segments, as I understand it. So we would need a sidewalk plan. But then rather than exempting some streets and they're just off the hook, even though they may well use city sidewalks after they move from their lower volume streets to higher volume streets as they go from the periphery downtown, everyone would pay equally the way we do for other infrastructure by impact fees. Like people closer to the sewer plant don't pay less because they're using less main. We use sidewalks, generically speaking, in proportion to our size of our households, not in proportion to our location. So my thought was like we could, the work Mike did could inform a sidewalk plan and a prioritization, but then rather than asking individual homeowners as they remodel or do additions or ADUs to physically build the sidewalk, is everyone, they would pay an impact fee, and then the city would spend that for whole segments of sidewalk so that we built out a logical pedestrian transportation system.
And so that was definitely comprehensive. And so a concrete example or an aspect for would be like Walker or Tusher. So we know that those roads are narrow, less narrow than some, more narrow than others. And Mike's inventory is super helpful to know kind of where they fit in terms of their width. But then we thought, well, what we could do is look at different approaches, like Kaylin was talking about, that maybe in certain areas we could, look at parking on one side and a multimodal transportation strip on the other, or something like that. And depending on width, we could do a different typology. I know that, Karen, I emailed you once and I was like, you're working on this hotspot funding and looking at complete streets. Are there any examples? And it's like, well, there's an example here and there, usually in commercial districts, not typically in residential where there's no sidewalk. And so just looking at different examples. So this does sort of bleed over into our complete streets work a bit, and our green streets work a bit as well. So I think for the purpose of tonight and for our strategic planning, the point, of talking about this is to say, we are working on it. It is something that we would like to utilize city resources to move forward. It was on the list last night that Carly, you presented to us in terms of projects we want to complete. So it's not like adding anything new by speaking to this item, but just that we need to formulate our idea as a council so that we can inform staff on like some direction moving forward. Because what the council decided prior to us as a collective body was, let's just require sidewalks everywhere. And then we made the decision as a council to say, well, if you don't want to build a sidewalk, you have to pay into a fee, right? And it's the sidewalk cost plus 10%. Is that correct? Now it just feels like so long ago. I don't want to be inaccurate. Kaylin, do you remember?
It is correct.
That is correct. So 10% on, so whatever the estimated cost is plus 10%. And that would go into a fund so we could build sidewalk later. And then the idea of how we operationalize raising the money to pay for it, and could it be through this proposed impact fee that Kaylin was talking about. So it's complex, but it's something that we still want to get done. And so at this point, between Mike's sidewalk, actually road width and sidewalk survey, you do have that PowerPoint presentation that would be nice to, maybe what the three of us need to do is huddle back again and put together finalize that presentation that then would go before the council, and the council could make comments, and then it can go to staff with direction. Because that's basically, we're here mostly because we say, hey, it's still not a resolved issue. And staff has said to us, well, what do you all as council want to see? And we said, well, that's complicated. So that's why we're putting this all together, right? So do those steps, are we in a consensus about moving forward with those steps?
Yeah. Well, Mayor, may I ask, would you like to conduct us while we have everybody here together tonight? I'm kind of curious, actually. Basically, what I'm trying to say is there are parts of town where their sidewalks are not in presently, nor do they need to be. That's the hypothesis. And as opposed to the original goal of sidewalks should be everywhere. So I'm kind of curious about a straw poll. Who signs up for not necessarily sidewalks versus yes, we got to have sidewalks everywhere. I'm curious to see what people's opinion is.
So you're basically asking who among the council feels like there are places that we should not require sidewalks.
Where they need not be applied, correct. Where the absence of sidewalk is considered to be an asset rather than a detriment.
Council? Responses? Yeah, Ronnie?
I mean, I guess I would just say it seems like this came to us because there are some residents who feel like the character nature of their street is one where they don't want them. So in theory, I think I'm okay with it. But I guess maybe either from Chuck or Carly or Joel, I just want to make sure I understand kind of best practices in terms of ADA. I just know sometimes with some seniors or, you know, some people who are in a situation where they're in a chair, it can complicate things. So I guess I'm just wondering if there's anything we need to be thinking about there.
I think those are the exact things you should be thinking of. I live where there are no sidewalks and no street lights, and I love the dark nights when I'm sitting out in my backyard, but when it comes time to go for a run at night, I have to get in my car and go somewhere else because it's not safe to run where I live. So it's a give and take. Those are the things that you have to think of, and your ADA members of your community who need that accessibility and who are in wheelchairs, it puts them in the road where you don't have them. And I don't know that we need to have them everywhere because that's not an everywhere situation, but I mean, you're on the right path. Those are what you need. That's what you need to be considering.
I guess in theory, there probably are neighborhoods where sidewalks don't have to be applied. But what is the criteria by which we collectively or a community decides that? If half the neighborhood decides they want sidewalks and the other half doesn't, how do we resolve that, that difference of opinion? I think the ADA considerations are important. Like Joel said, I don't know that that happens in every neighborhood, but when it does, we as a city either become liable or negligent if somebody gets hurt. So I think assessing the sidewalks that we have and making sure that they're in good repair is just common sense, and we should do that. As far as leaving where sidewalks belong and where they don't belong is, it's a harder question. My neighborhood is a little figure 8 and it has a sidewalk on one side of one street because the developer wasn't a very smart developer and wasn't consistent. So in my neighborhood, it's parking strip and people park on the sidewalk.
Well, it seems like rather than taking more time on this topic, what Kaylin and Mike and I should do is meet and then report back to council in a future workshop. Because I think the two of you just illustrated how that's a complicated question to answer, but one that we want to answer in this process. So I think that if we hadn't had a pandemic to deal with, this sidewalk situation wouldn't have been as drawn on as long as it had. So I'd like to move on because I want to have time for hotspot and I want to have time for complete streets and water and sewer. So with that, I'm going to move us right along to hotspot transportation projects. Carly, can you give the brief on this one, please?
Yeah, sure. And it's both me and Chuck. Chuck has some materials available.
Okay. Okay. I'm sorry.
No, don't apologize. I guess just where we are right now is just to provide an update on where the hotspot projects rest. The UDOT has engaged with a consultant, Farron Pierce, to do the work for the shuttle transit pilot project. I know a couple of people on the Zoom call have been contacted and interviewed for their work as they're trying to scope out that work. And we anticipate, I'm trying to remember exactly the month, that will be done around April. So perhaps the package will be ready for the Transportation Commission at their May meeting. So I think that's the target for when we will hear the news about those getting approved. And then from there,
May meeting?
May, I think it's going to be May. Yeah. From there, of course, it depends on the structure of, if they're approved, the structure of how the funds are divided. I imagine, this is my first impression, that the county will get money for the Spanish Valley Trail. The city might receive some funds for the downtown parking projects. And then the shuttle seems a little more unclear to me. And I guess once the money is received or that's approved, we bid for design and we just get going and start design and then construction. So a big year for transportation projects in Moab. And Chuck also, if anyone wants to get a refresher on what was proposed to the Transportation Commission or to UDOT rather, he's available to talk about that or any other insight. So any questions about that? Thoughts?
I think that's a pretty accurate report out on where we are with hotspot funding. we were hoping, probably just worth to mention too, that we were hoping to be awarded back in December and that we'd be moving forward with the finalization, right?
Yes.
That did not happen. And that didn't happen because Monty and others said, well, we want to work on this, shuttle. And we don't want to fund the other and then put the shuttle funding on hold. We want to do it all together. So we said, okay. And so we haven't actually received any of the hotspot money at all. But it seems too that when we were talking with them originally about this pocket, that they're willing to grow the pocket. Isn't that correct?
I guess the pocket is
The amount of money that that's going to be dispersed to us through hotspot. Isn't there? What's the amount that we're talking about now?
I'm trying to remember off the top of my head. I think it's, if the shuttle is included, is it around six point something, Chuck, do you know?
Well, are you asking just about the city mayor or the whole hotspot funding?
The whole hotspot funding.
Yeah, so it started out as $10 million back in the day. And then we dropped 300 grand. And then, so there's discussion about, though, that on the transit side, they can bring some other funding in, I think.
That's
so
true.
That's what I think what you may be getting at. So I think there's still about 9+ million total. Plus they may have some other transit specific, like to the tune of $1 million. Is it the number I remember, Carly? That they can throw in the pot. But of course they want the city and the county, I think, to make those commitments to year 4 and 5, the way I recall, for maintenance of the system if a system's implemented.
That's correct. That's right. We would have to make a commitment between the communities down here for $500,000 a year for years 4 and 5.
Yes.
And then another, I guess, outstanding question is, we were the money they approved for, or are going to approve, hopefully, in the proposal is for the downtown parking projects, is the asphalt option of design for those parking improvements. And I know we've expressed desire to have some amenities and some additional landscape and those kinds of things. UDOT has mentioned the availability of some loans that we might be able to get for that kind of work. But again, just that was a question that was not quite resolved. And we might have to deliberate on that later in the year when we get to design.
So for the purposes of time and the purposes of the fact that we're discussing this in strategic planning, I think what's important for the council to just sort of focus on it at this point is like, does everyone feel like we know where we are with the hotspot funding now with that debrief and just kind of everything going? I think we all feel pretty comfortable with where we are, right? Head nods. Yes. So then the question is also moving forward, is everybody that was on the committee before going to continue on the committee? Are we needing to form a new committee? Is what's being asked of additional participation from this council to sort of finalize what's going on?
I'm not sure because I don't know what the structure is going to look like if the funds are awarded. I would assume that the city would be awarded the funds for the construction, but that, UDOT hasn't necessarily made that commitment to us. So I guess that's to be determined if we have like another round of engagement for design, and we would want a committee to design that and to help shepherd it through. Or, there could be work appropriate for a committee, but.
Yeah, and if we're talking, when the money's awarded, the projects, then we'll have separate projects, 2 of which are in the city and 1 of which is in the county. So I'm not sure that the current committee structure is appropriate or needed for working out the details, since it's and 2 of the county members are no longer in office.
True. Yeah. So we might have to revisit that once the funding is awarded.
Well, and this actually takes us nicely into the conversation about complete, excuse me, great, complete streets and green streets, because we've been, part of what the feedback was, or the sort of conclusion that I felt with our preliminary mapping, and Karen, correct me if I'm wrong, because you were very intimately part of this, as a committee member, as was Mike, correct? The two of you were on the hotspot committee?
And Kaylin.
And Kaylin, all three of you. Oh, okay. Well, just that we really walked away from that saying, we really want to make sure that whether it comes from hotspot funding or comes from us, that we want to have a project that we feel really good about and that is beautiful, and something like nice lights, and something that really feels good about our downtown, and that we felt like we needed to have a deeper effort toward a downtown plan and a complete streets. So let's talk about complete streets. Who wants to kick us off with complete streets?
So I can start us off.
Awesome.
Chuck and Nora and I have met to discuss complete streets and green streets. And just to review, a complete street is when you are looking at planning and design, you take into consideration all types of users of the street. So that includes walking, biking, people who have disabilities and are mobile through a chair, whatever it is. And so when you are looking at designing your streets in your community, you're not just looking at moving cars. So that's the definition of a complete street. And many cities have a complete streets resolution. We are also looking at including a green streets provision in the complete streets, and that is also taking into consideration aesthetics and sustainability when you are constructing and looking at design and engineering. So where we are with this is that Chuck and Nora and I have met, we've talked about it, and our plan is that we will do, I am going to draft a resolution for the council's consideration. And we thought it would be helpful to start with a PowerPoint presentation at an upcoming council meeting where we could explain in fancier detail what a complete street is, what a green street is, and what the benefits are for the city in doing that. And then also what are the drawbacks, i.e. cost is a drawback. And so plans are great, but you need funding to make it happen, as we've realized. So that's the plan, is that I would come up with the resolution, and then we would put a PowerPoint presentation together, do the PowerPoint, and then get input from council about the draft resolution and what other things you might want to see, or things that are in there that you don't want to see. Councilmember Guzman Newton has sent me some samples from Grand Junction on their complete streets ordinance. I've gotten the one from Salt Lake City, and I've also gotten the active transportation plan from St. George. I'm unaware at this time that if there are any other cities in Utah that have a complete streets, but I've done the research, and so far that's what I've come up with. And finally, with regard to the green streets portion of it, I did reach out to Ross McGann after her recent presentation to the council, and I got input from her about some good templates for green streets and who she thinks would be good, what cities have done it right in her opinion. And she sent me some samples from Tempe, Arizona. So that is in the process. I've gotten it partially drafted, but then there was a lot of noise going on that interfered with my ability to continue. So we really want to make this happen, and partially because there's going to be a lot of opportunity coming up with the new federal administration for funding. And I don't know if having a complete streets ordinance would be necessary for some of that funding, but certainly having it teed up and be ready so that if it is a requirement, we're ready for it.
And I think also that presentation and that work is going to inform what we do for the sidewalk project as well, for the sidewalk plan. So, well, this is this sounds good in terms of action items. Joel?
Do we want to combine the two projects, Mayor, as you and your group with the sidewalks meets? Do we want to make that a part of the Complete Streets, Green Streets project and try and, or do we want to keep them separate?
I feel great about combining. I just feel like we need to have a huddle as a council and make sure that we're feeling good, because while we could say like, yes, just make them complete streets, we also have complicated areas that are like a strip or two of agriculture. And then we have like a whole bunch that don't have any sidewalks at all. And so we just, I think we just need to have a moment that where we bring that to the table.
Yeah, I think if we keep them separate, then one becomes contingent upon the completion of the other, and the timetable becomes extremely drawn out. And so I think we should definitely try and push to get them combined.
Easy question for you guys. The Complete Streets idea has nothing to do per se with hotspot funding. Is that true?
Well, Complete Streets is a plan. It's an intention. It would be a resolution from the council saying it is our intention to do, when we're looking at planning and engineering, to do this with our streets. It will have a sentence in there. It says it's contingent on funding. So the hotspot is the second part of it, which is, do you have the funding to do your intention?
So, Mike, to answer that, and the reason why I was feeling a sense of urgency to try to get this on in our code is that UDOT, I reached out to them to ask if we had a complete street plan and we got funding to do this downtown, reorganization, would they have to honor it if we had a complete streets plan? And they said they would. They do respect the plans. Like, so St. George just finished their complete street efforts. Salt Lake has theirs. And UDOT would try to do everything they can to adhere to what our codes are. So that's why it felt like timing was of the essence to try to get this going and get our priorities straight to create a downtown that is honoring the most vulnerable of our population, which is the elderly, the handicapped, and the youth in our community. So
okay. Well, all this is great, Karen, Lori, thank you. The reason I ask is because I always thought that there was this basic tension so far as hotspot funding was concerned between UDOT, whose primary goal, and they're trying to be sweethearts and all, but their primary goal is to move traffic through town, and they were focused on a lot of parking off street in order to expedite that. And the Complete Streets idea is a very popular concept. Everybody's all for it. I'm for it. I think it's a wonderful idea, but I'm just a little skeptical that UDOT might actually fund this in any depth. And furthermore, with the I think it's a great idea to have it on the books, but will it conflict with, because what we presented to the UDOT people about downtown parking on streets is a long ways from a complete street concept. That's why I ask.
So if I
But
may,
a plan like that could help us with financial leverage. That's what Karen was saying, is that it provides financial leverage for us.
if I understand the issue correctly, it wouldn't change the stall count that we've proposed to UDOT. It's just that many of the green and aesthetic amenities that we would also like, so that we're not just turning our wide streets into parking lots, but like multimodal oases, require additional funding, probably above the 3% that UDOT said that they would normally allocate for aesthetics. And so, if I'm understanding correctly, having a complete streets policy in place would strengthen our argument that they should include extra funding to achieve the full vision for the downtown streets.
Yep.
not just the parking
Monday.
aspect.
Okay, so my 7 o'clock marker just went off.
you.
We haven't talked about water or sewer line replacement. Joel?
We can bring that to you guys. Is we kind of know where the strategy and all that is on that. We can bring that as a part of our budget discussions as we're talking about what projects we're doing going into next year.
Yeah, and I was just gonna say too, that's kind of a budget, that kind of folds into budget land anyway. Cause
Well, as we set budget meetings coming in the next, well, it's March 11th. We usually set those with you guys into March 1st to April. So as we set those meetings up, we'll hit those issues then.
yeah. Okay, well then, Chuck, is that, did you want to share anything?
Well, if Joel and you were thinking you want to wait till later, we'll wait till later. We were prepared to talk about a few things, but if there's no time, we can do it later.
I think the sentiment's probably, we want to be more proactive than reactive because we know that's, makes more sense, but we know you have to have the money to do the project. Ronnie, you were raising your hand?
Oh, I mean, I was just going to say this was one I requested that was really important to me, only because we've heard those studies about how, ideally how many miles or feet we'd be doing, and just, we know we're not anywhere near that. So I just want to give a plug when we get to the budget to talk about it, or if there's a way we can give Chuck 5 minutes now. Yeah. Or
another thing, Ronnie or Mayor, we could do is the last item on the agenda is the budget revenue enhancement and sewer fees. We discussed sewer fees a lot the other night, and revenue enhancement won't take that long. So if we wanted to take an additional 15 minutes out of that last category, we probably could.
Well, yeah, definitely.
Sustainability probably won't take the full 45 either. So I think we have.
Okay, well then we'll move on. So water resources is where we are now.
Oh, I thought you were going to do that now. You don't want to
Oh. Take 5 minutes now?
Let's take 15 minutes, Mayor, and do water line and sewer line conversation that Chuck and them are prepared to do. And
15 minutes? Okay.
well, as long as up to then, I would think.
Yeah.
Okay.
We can get it done.
Okay.
What I thought would be a good place to start, and I think this comes to part of your comments, Ronnie, is can you see my screen? This capital improvement project list. So this is the capital improvement project list that was adopted by council in March of 2020. And I just went in, I'd like to quickly review this because even though it was the year of COVID, we were working on this. So I just did this simply with some comment sheets. King Creek Road reconstruction, we have a design that's done. We did it in-house. That's one of our shovel-ready projects. If federal funding comes along, we could do it. If you want to revisit it, if we get another way, we could do that too. Walnut Lane housing projects. It's going to be in the bond 2021 if council passes that later this month. Downtown parking structure is now the downtown median parking that we've talked about. So it kind of converted projects, but we just talked about that's moving along through the hotspot process. The 100 South green infrastructure project, shovel ready. Again, I think that'd be a great one if there were federal dollars available where they wanted to, because this touches all sorts of pieces of our infrastructure: water, sewer, roads, storm drainage. The 100 West Roundabout, it's funded by UDOT. We'll be entering the design phase this year and potentially construction next year. The water source redundancy, that is in the water bond for the end of the month if council passes it. Same with the water tank, water bond for 2021. Mill Creek Drive water line, water bond 2021, which is the over a mile repair of new water line, water distribution lines. And then Emma Boulevard, the dispersed parking is also part of the hotspot funding package. So while there's a lot to do on here, I thought it would just be worthwhile to show that of this 5-year CIP that council adopted, we're making progress on a lot of fronts. We're not there yet on all of them, but we're making progress. And of course, there's still a lot of projects there that aren't funded right now. And with that, I was hoping, are there any questions about this 5-year overall CIP where we're involved with now? Because I was going to turn it to Levi to talk specifically about some more water line projects. No. Okay.
So to go along with what Chuck said, these couple of projects is just the tip of the iceberg. Once we have the water, the available water, the storage capacity, the redundancy in the wells, there's numerous lines in town throughout our subdivisions that need to be upgraded. They don't supply adequate fire flows. So Locust Lane, Rose Tree.
Levi, can you see this?
Yep.
That's okay.
Yeah, I can see that. And then there's a couple areas that still need looped. Knob Hill to 200 North, Center Street. Half that line needs to be upgraded and connected to Shields. Stewart Lane doesn't have adequate fire flows. Carlos, all those areas don't have adequate fire flows. So we have a lot of work to do. And that's not including the failing infrastructure. Some of those areas have great pipes. They're 4-inch, 6-inch, they're not adequate for fire flows.
So this is the $5 million project that was included when council only raised the rates last year. And then this is the total cost of like 15 million, which was out of the water distribution plan. So these were in the rate study, these were in the master plan, and what Levi was pointing out that in addition to the ones that are going to be in the bond, we have other ones that we're hoping to click away at as we can from the regular funding. Other one I thought we'd take a moment to look at is, I had mentioned this, but this happened right as COVID happened again. We did a road assessment study for the city. We had one of our on-call consultants do it, and they walked every mile of road in the city, walked every sidewalk in the city and evaluated them and came up with treatments, not always replacement, not always reconstruction, but there are different treatments that you do in the life of a pavement that will extend the life of that pavement. And if we were to adopt this as our roadway treatment program, not including new roads, except it does have Keene Creek Road and reconstruction as its #1 project too. It's a total package of $8.7 million. So we have an inventory now, which sets the stage for a transportation plan, if you will, where we can, or at least lead the budgeting. And this has kind of jumped out in front of a plan. So we could budget based on this. So there are needs, and we have an evaluation of all of those. And then, of course, the other thing is the sewer master plan has a series of projects in there as well. And Joel, you may have a different perspective on this, but I think we kind of slowed down this last year on the sewer line replacements in order to kind of get a real grip on what the impacts of the economy were and the budget, so we could make the debt service payments on the WRF. I mean, generally speaking, in a broad, the need hasn't gone away, but we just have kind of slowed it down to make sure we have the funding. It's my impression of it.
I see Emma Boulevard on there, and I know Emma Boulevard is kind of bigger than just even pavement.
Oh, was on that one? Sorry, I thought I was going to go the other one. Oh, this doesn't have Emma Boulevard anything to do with on here. It's Emma. Oh, this is the part of it. Yeah, this is the currently paved part of Emma Boulevard, right? Where it goes up to the Church of Christ, from 400 North to Church of Christ. Whereas Emma Boulevard, in terms of hotspot funding, is a much bigger thing, right? Because it goes from, it extends all the way up to the highway.
Which is going to cost us some money too.
That's right, and it's on our CIP. And Joel, I think, again, we're going to be talking budget, right? And I think some of the guidance from council is important on which projects we put into next year's budget, at least to try and.
Yeah, we are gonna meet with council as we go through budget and the CIP list and prioritizing based off amount of capital that we have, but bonding capacities is gonna be a part of that discussion.
Levi, is there anything you wanted to say on any of these? Otherwise,
I don't have anything else to add on this.
Well, let's go ahead and unshare screen and then we can move on to the connecting growth and water resources. That's just a nice flow into that topic. I am on a roll.
Yeah, it's sort of me and Chuck and Levi on this one. Of course, Joel and everyone can participate. We have a couple of ways this discussion can kind of unfold. I know Chuck has some PowerPoints just to help the discussion, but before we dive into it, I could just take 5 minutes at the front end. You know, I was listening to your discussion last night, the Nora's presentation, I think, was really interesting, captivating to all of us because of the overwhelming and explosive growth we're facing as a community. And as I'm trying to think about how to best advise you and chart a path forward, how do we tackle these big problems, especially as they're related to water, I just wanted to talk about how I'm sort of organizing it, or what I'm hearing, and how I'm sort of considering some things. I've talked to Chuck about this, talked to Levi and to Joel about these kinds of things. So I think it just might be helpful to see how we start to sort through it, if that makes sense. And then we can get into, we have some slides about other water policies that some concrete actions to be taken, and water conservation and demand policies. So we have some more materials if you're interested. So what I'm hearing are sort of two distinct questions or concerns. They're related, but they're a little distinct. One, let's talk about the first one. The first one is, how do we know going forward that we have enough water to accommodate the foreseeable growth we have, and even beyond what is sort of known? This is a very good question. This is an important question that we have to answer, and I was really happy to hear that this is something you might want to include in the visioning. We might need some outside expertise to help us design a certain regime for how we track this and how we make sure it's all in lockstep. And I guess my just initial impression is this initial recommendation is not to get too set in one regime before we start doing that work, because the solution will probably be very unique to Moab because we have a unique set of facts, right? And I would recommend being position-based rather than, or no, interest-based, don't be position-based, rather than position-based. I mean, the interest is we want to make sure that we have a sustainable water supply and growth to match it, or not match it, but just that we're covered. And there are a lot of ways we can get to that. The good news is that there are other communities in the West who are tackling this. Even here in Utah, there are some municipalities that have some really innovative thoughts. One example that Chuck has told me about is Prescott, which requires, if you're just building a single family development, this wouldn't apply to you, or affordable housing wouldn't apply to you. But if you are above a certain density or water use, it would require the developer to demonstrate or to bring water to the city and to turn over those water rights to the city. And this happens up in, I know Joel has experience with this, water banks and exaction. This is a tool that is well understood, well used, and it is absolutely something that could be available to us. So just sort of, we don't have to do that, but there are some strategies out there that I think have been effective. And so there is definitely reason to hope and to get some answers, and I'm so glad to be part of the conversation. The second branch, so there's what do we do? How do we know that we have enough water for our growth? And there's sort of another branch that I hope I sort of captured accurately. which is we have this explosive growth. Is water a tool we can use to get it under control? Am I sort of understanding that generally? And this is a very complicated question without a clear path. So if you're talking just generally about development within our existing municipal boundaries, that gets complicated quickly. We have 14th Amendment issues and takings issues. So, but if you're talking about something like annexing, properties that annex, it's a much different scenario. We have a lot more authority, a lot more control, because we're not taking away something that this person never had or this developer ever had. We don't have to get into the details of that, but I'm just sort of letting you know how I'm thinking about it. Another consideration is that if we start using water as, say we do this scenario, I'm not suggesting anyone's doing it, no more water for development. Developers will go and find other water. There is ample private water in this valley. And a developer is perfectly capable of going and buying an irrigation company, buying private wells, converting them from irrigation to culinary use, and developing with that water. So it won't necessarily stop the growth. It'll just change how it's happening. And we lose a seat at the table. In an exaction scenario, what's great about it is we get that water, but we remain in control of it. And we remain in control, well, as much as you can, of the development. So we keep a seat at the table and we have a measure of a control of our destiny. Just some things to sort of think about. And another just ephemeral thought I had is, the state and the legislature have a lot of authority over what we can do with our water. And I don't mean to sound like an alarmist or anything like that, but that there's some, I heard that there was a state law passed in Texas a couple years ago where the state actually required Houston to contract with a certain developer or someone who needed water. And Houston said, no, this is our water. And the state legislature said, you're doing it. And I don't know how that played out, but I can tell you that things are getting ugly in Western states, right? So we're facing an enormous amount of pressure. A ton of money is going to be directed at freeing up water in Moab. So not to sound doom and gloom or anything, I don't mean to say that at all, but just like those things that we need to start considering as we're developing policies. And I really look forward to the conversation, but I thought that might be helpful to understand sort of the framework I'm trying to work from. So I guess from that, I would say some really terrific news is that we do have some really concrete, time-tested policies that I think we should move forward with that are a little clearer, that we don't have to workshop as much as these other two big questions. And Chuck, do you want to are there any questions on what I just said or reactions? Okay, I'm happy to talk about this more individually with any of you. If you have questions, feel free to reach out. Chuck, do you want to start sharing the screen? Sorry, I know we've been PowerPointed to death, so I won't, unless you want me to, do this or stay on these slides. We certainly don't have to for long. These slides should actually be kind of familiar to you. This is what Chuck and I presented to you, I think in December, and I'm just sort of bringing these up again because I believe Ronnie asked, hey, when do we make decisions about what we do? How do we prioritize these? So I'm just bringing them back to you today. And actually, I would add from this slide another point, and probably at the top, which is about the connecting growth and water questions to the top. So that should be there. I hear you loud and clear about that. And so did Chuck and Levi and Joel. We're all on the same page about that. And let's see, I've got to make you guys smaller. So obviously, we want to continue understanding the aquifer, basically. We're going to prioritize water conservation or water demand policies that might help us make our system more resilient and more like strengthen it against vulnerabilities. We're going to continue like maintaining and addressing our distribution system, and we'll be talking about that a little later, obviously. Address our growing or expanding water infrastructure as it happens. Water monitoring, we have some opportunities with that this year. Ensure that we have water quality protections, so not just water quantity, but also making sure we're protecting the water quality from, especially protecting the aquifer from harmful development. And of course, engage with other water users, because as we know, this is an integrated large system, and we need to engage with these other water users in order to ensure the resilience of our water supply. Any questions on that?
So one thing that I'm wondering about is that, you know, there's still a fair amount of uncertainty, it seems, and I realize that may get clarified soon, about the total water resources available in the valley. And there's something called the precautionary principle, where when there's uncertainty, you err on the side of being conservative, or in this case, you might, where there's some range of available water, you go with the low estimate for the time being, so that you don't end up in a pickle down the road if that comes to be the case. So I'm wondering if there's any place in sort of this high level statement of priorities that's how we will trend, if that's the inclination of the council.
So like apply the precautionary principle when it comes to water resource, I guess, allocation and development. Am I capturing that?
Yeah.
And Kaylin, I'm also so happy that you brought that up, because I realize I didn't address, there's another bullet point, and we're going to get to it. I think that's a very good suggestion, and I think it's appropriately applied when it comes to water resources. I have a very conservative approach when it comes to that kind of philosophy, so it's well heard. And we're right about not knowing what's going on in the aquifer, like the Glen Canyon, and Chuck is also going to talk about expanding our water resources, actually. So, you know,
should we move on to that? Do you want to just move right into that?
Yeah, we have the, I'm not driving. Sorry, Chuck. I'm like clicking on it. We can move past the conservation policies and programs. We can even like talk about these at a meeting too, because they're a little, I mean, if there's appetite now, but I think I got good responses on all that from our December workshop. But Chuck, do you want to go to the water resource development part? And Chuck is more informed on these. I would say, like, what's good about so many of these options, like specifically the partnership, is like the more intertwined we become with the other users, the more we actually have more control. I know like the instinct is sometimes to isolate and to protect, but the more our interests are interrelated with like WISA, Moab Irrigation, and San Juan, the harder it is to sort of break break the line between good water management. So, sorry, and Chuck, do you want to tell us about these? Oh, you're muted. You remuted yourself.
Still muted.
How about now?
There you go.
Yeah. So we just kind of thought about, well, right now the city's water supply comes from the Glen Canyon aquifer. And as we've talked about in previous council meetings, there's some level of uncertainty about how much water is really there, and there's an ongoing situation, but it looks like there's still water there for now, is what I would say in my opinion. But what if the aquifer becomes depleted? Because we don't want panic in the streets. There are other opportunities. There's the valley fill aquifer, which there are people out there today drinking valley fill aquifer water. It's not quite as sweet as our Glen Canyon aquifer water, but it could be treated if needed. It could be used for secondary, for irrigation, landscaping. Colorado River water is a viable opportunity. We're the only city in the state sitting on the Colorado River. I mean, I'm not pushing to use that water, but it's a reality that if we needed water, we could get water. And I've talked to DWR about our water rights usable in the Colorado River? And the answer, generally speaking, is yes. We could potentially consolidate private wells into our public system. I mean, that's part of what happened up in San Juan County. They went door to door and said to people, you turn off your private wells or give them to our system, we'll take care of you and put in a water distribution system. And same way with off their septics and into the sanitary sewer system. So that's just an opportunity. Capture spring overflow. Right now, there are times in the wet years where like at Skakel Spring, it flows down to the river, which is a good thing. But if we have the water rights and we need that water, we could replumb the system, if you will, to capture some of that spring overflow as well as tank overflow. And Levi and I have spent a lot of time talking about that, and we'll be investigating that as part of this bond package where we talked about optimization of the system. Partnership with other water supply agencies such as WISA, Moab Irrigation, San Juan Special Services District, the interconnect agreement that we've talked about. We used to have an interconnect with WISA. We need to have another one in the future, which would allow us to borrow water from them, if you will, during times when our system was in stress, and vice versa, if it would work. And then there's others to be determined, but kind of the point of this is that we're evaluating options. So it's not like if the Glen Canyon aquifer is beyond safe yield and we're mining it, there are other opportunities to meet our demands for water.
Any questions on that?
I have
We
a question.
share screen just so that we can see each other so that if there are comments. Thank you.
Thanks. It's great you guys are thinking that through, but am I right, Chuck and Levi, that you never want to end up in that position where you're mining your aquifer? I mean, really, it's on us to make sure we're doing everything we can to not end up in that situation.
You're exactly right, Ronnie. I think right now at the moment we're using a lot of water going towards irrigation. We have a really good opportunity right now. We have failing infrastructure. Our roads, they need repaired. We need to start from the bottom up. I think we have a really great opportunity to possibly think about maybe a secondary water system. It would be for irrigation purposes only. I mean, we might not tie it in right now, but as we replace our infrastructure, we put a secondary water line for irrigation purposes for the future. And it's there when we need it. If we ever do come to an agreement with Moab Irrigation, we can tie them together. Moab Irrigation, we have our systems, storm drain systems, and the irrigation systems, they intertwine. And the irrigation takes precedence. We have failing storm drains that need skewing. Anyways, yes.
Thank you.
You're muted, Chuck.
Or should I say Karen?
Oh,
He's the new one, Karen. Now we pick on him.
Karen's gonna need some aloe for that burn. Chuck, were you gonna say something? Because you're muted hardcore.
Yeah, quickly, I just wanted to say that in answer to Ron's question, part of it too is, at the staff level, we're spending time, and we've been to council a couple of times, and we're moving forward on developing policies and practice recommendations for you to do things like manage our system better. I think we've entered into a new era here at the City of Moab in the last year to 2 years, where I think the key thing that we're doing is we're not just water system providers, is we're water resource managers. And as the group of us, staff and council and our neighbors down the street. So things like time of day ordinances, manage our resource where we can, are useful to help prevent getting into the mining of the aquifer. And answer to Ronnie's question, things that we can do to be wise stewards, I think is a good thing to do. So that was all I had to say. Thanks.
Thank you.
Do we want to move on to demand management policies? It's 7:30 right now. We were gonna cut into sustainability an extra 15 minutes if needed. So I don't know if I should push us off this topic or if we should stick a little longer.
I have one question that might relate to budget, and that's just that if we're going to seriously consider pre-plumbing for secondary irrigation, should there be a plan for that and allocation for the piping for road reconstruction that's happening in the next budget year?
I think Chuck can answer that. Chuck or Levi?
I think Levi threw that out there as a great thing for us to think about. I don't know if we could fit it into the budgets of our new road projects because we've already got those designed without it, but if we can, it's a great idea. I think those policies, there are other outside funding sources too, that if we come up with some policies and that we want to make part of our standard practice, we can go pursue other outside funding sources to maximize our dollars. There are federal dollars out there through RD, through the Bureau of Reclamation, that I think if we have a good plan, we can capture some of those.
There's a group called the RD, but it's like the Conservation District.
Yeah, RC&Ds.
RC&D. So I actually have a message from Sam Cunningham, who sits on that board. And I haven't called her back yet because I actually have this as a pending question, but she was hopeful that we could have a city representative on that board because she did say that they've got money. I don't know. Money, it's like, when you think of like, do you have money to buy a t-shirt or to buy a new wardrobe? Like when we're talking about the cost of a secondary water system, that's a new wardrobe. That's not just a new t-shirt. So it's not like a new water tank. It's a new wardrobe. You know what I mean? But so it's very hard to imagine having the funding for that.
But it's going to be so I'm sorry, Chuck, but to Levi's point, it seems like it would be a lot cheaper to do it if we're already, starting at the ground up, before you buy a t-shirt and realize you got the wrong size, so.
Well, but it's like when you want to build your own wardrobe and you take several years to build the new wardrobe.
Right. It seems like as like any project, when you put the infrastructure in, right, the first place, it's going to be a lot cheaper than digging it up again. So if there's a line item that
there's also another option where we actually take advantage of an existing secondary system and maybe contract with Moab Irrigation to use theirs.
Do we find it to be efficient and effective as a secondary water system? Irrigation water system?
Is theirs efficient and effective? I don't know the details of their system, so I don't want to speculate, but I can tell you that one idea that has been presented to us, it's just a concept only, is finding a way to tap in, like doing an exchange agreement, perhaps, and tap into Colorado River water as our secondary irrigation and somehow include it into the Moab irrigation system. So it's like those kinds of really complicated, out of the box thinking kind of projects that we're kind of looking for, right? How do we take advantage most of our existing resources, existing infrastructure?
Mike, were you going to comment about Moab irrigation?
Yes. Well, I'm on the board of Moab Irrigation Company. I can tell you guys right now that unless a lot of money is invested into that system to make it somewhat fancier and more efficient than the current gravity-fed system, it's not pressurized. All this is possible, but we're talking about a lot of money, folks. And furthermore, all the river water is right now is already in use. I mean, the pipe, I don't know if you guys know this, but the pipes just came up today for the start of a brand new irrigation system and so forth. But all that water is already appropriated by other shareholders in MIC. And all what you guys are talking about is possible, but you're going to have to buy out a number of other people to make water available to other city residents.
And that's Mill Creek water, not Colorado River water.
That's correct.
So it's the allocation of Mill Creek water that Moab Irrigation Company uses for the select shareholders. And what Carly's saying is think out of the box. What if we were pumping and using Colorado River water for irrigation? And then could we use Moab Irrigation Company's distribution method to service? And I'm just saying, that's complicated, just like what you said, Mike, with it's not pressurized, it's running in our, it's using curbs to divert, which is cheaper than pipes. But it's hard to, with most irrigation systems in our yards, we've got sprinklers and drip and one run of the Colorado River water through my irrigation and all my little heads would clog.
Yeah, one more thing, and then I'll quote because we need to move on. We've talked about Colorado. I think it's actually a county water right, not a city water right, if I'm not mistaken. And if you pump it into, we've always haven't done that because it's expensive to pump it up from the river, not to mention the infrastructure. And if you do pressurize one way or the other, you're going to have to pump up against the hill, which is going to turn MIC from a gravity-fed system into a pump system. And there's a state law now that says you have to meter pressurized systems. So that's another expense and so forth. So all this can be done. All of Carly's laundry list of other ways to get money are all valid, and they're all more expensive and more involved than what we're currently doing. We don't appreciate, we have some of the lowest water rates in the state, and it's because we've had springs right next door where the water comes out of the ground for free, basically. And that era is gone, kids. Okay, so we can do everything you're talking about, but nothing is easy and nothing is cheap.
Yeah, we're talking about like 50-year projects out. These are long-term kind of things. And, Mike's completely right. Like the cheapest thing we can do is demand management, is conservation.
Yeah, well, that's going to run into political opposition. I can tell you right now, it already has.
Yeah. Oh, it definitely does. That behavior change is hard in communities where it's new.
Well, let's talk demand management because that's the next thing on our agenda. So,
do you want to pull up those that PowerPoint?
Which one, Carly?
The one that has a list of like the conservation policies. I would say like all of our options going forward are going to be controversial. There's no easy one. We're talking about water in the West and drying up West. So
and I'd like to just give a plug to the knowledge and expertise that we have on staff, but then also on council. Like, as I look across this screen at our council members, we are so lucky. We are rich with human power and human capacity to be able to tackle this. So I'm very grateful, and I'm killing time while you're pulling up your PowerPoint and sharing your screen as well.
6 or 7.
I don't know if you guys will be able to see this while you're killing time, but this postcard says, discussing water rights, a Western pastime.
Is that that was like
They're wielding shovels at each other.
Oh,
I feel like that's actual footage from my old job, so it's a little too real. Chuck, have you? Oh, there you go.
So go ahead. Where would you like to be?
This was a different slide, I think, or
This was the presentation we gave.
I meant for the original presentation that we had up initially, and then I think it was like slide.
Your presentation, got it.
Yeah, poor Chuck went chasing something else because I wasn't clear. That one, yeah. So, I mean, I'm happy to run through these. I think we did that about a month ago or a couple months ago.
well, maybe instead of running through the list, maybe like, because we're talking strategic planning, maybe you could just suggest top three. I mean, yeah, because obviously that's a ton.
Yeah.
And I think we're looking to staff to maybe, because we've looked at this too, like what's our lowest, either our lowest hanging fruit or the biggest bang for our buck that we can actually put our energy and resources into for this year.
Right. When it comes to, and Chuck, feel free to trump me on some of this. I think that green infrastructure ordinance goes really well with our green streets, complete streets discussions. So there's benefits there, and plus it, we're touching on that work already. Some low hanging fruit, like a time of day watering ordinance, and a landscape ordinance, where it doesn't take a lot of money. The money is in developing those ordinances and vetting them. Another option that's not on here but probably should be is a gray water ordinance, maybe exploring some of that for whether we want to include that for residential, new residential development.
Harley?
And things that are kind of easy, like you wouldn't have to do anything. This is more of a staff thing, and we're getting a new sustainability director, like a rainwater harvesting program, like finding those bins. So I guess I'll keep it to the things that you guys would be doing. And so that's what I have in mind. What about you, Chuck?
Yeah, I think that the time of day of week watering ordinance, there's some real advantages to that. There's enough data out there that we can save 5 to 10% or more. Some of it says 30% of the irrigation water that is being used. And I think, having lived in many places where they've had those ordinances, it just gives people a level of awareness that water is a resource, right? And I think that's part of what we need to do is managing our system, is let people know that. I think Mike hit it on the head. The springs were flowing free, but they're probably not, those days are over, whether it's due to climate change or changes of us people living in the valley. But I think that time of day of week is a good one. I think the green infrastructure is a good one. I like the one about the auditing the high quantity users as well, but that's going to be a little bit more involved, I think. So.
And that's staff. Yeah, we can do that.
And what would that
entail?
entail? I mean, yeah, even if they were audited, what is the outcome for that?
The outcome would be like a series of recommendations. I suspect the high quantity users are going to be the high irrigators. And so it might be like a sprinkler check or a sprinkler recommendation program. They, like USU does these up north, and we've spoken before about having the extension train some students in it. What they do is they go around, they observe your sprinkler system and identify where you're using too much and where you might not to. Another option too is like, well, it probably be some hotels or those like big users. You would do an audit of their internal water use and where they might be accidentally wasting or where they can achieve better efficiency. And those are great because oftentimes I don't know if there's grant necessarily available, but there's cost savings to making the recommendations from the audit. So often there's an ROI to high quantity users participating in that.
So I wonder with the policies, if we couldn't move forward. I mean, we're like you said, Carly, hiring a sustainability director. I'm assuming that director is going to come to the table with some thoughts and recommendations as well. But I do feel like policies that are, like top 3 policies might be really helpful. And you can go ahead and unshare screen so we can see each other. But we've got expertise in our valley around green infrastructure, rainwater harvesting, and this is a good time for us to move forward with policies like that. And I do think too, the time of day watering is familiar. And so it's not a radical thing. It's not back in angle parking. It's more familiar. The one pushback is, if you make me water at night, I don't know if my system is leaking. So I think there's going to be some education needed, and we're going to need a strategic partner with all this policy. I think back when we did the plastic bag ban, and USU was a strategic partner in that. And so, it might be important with any of these policies that we also identify strategic partners for implementation. Ronnie?
I don't want to take up much time, but really quick question. I just feel bad for this resident who asked me, and I asked this at our city meeting, but I was just going to see if anybody had more of an answer, because, they're trying to be very water conscious. They were trying to figure out when if we did some kind of ordinance, like time of day of the week, when it might show up, because, now is the time of year when people are planning their garden or their landscaping in many cases. And do we have any information at this point for people? They're just trying to think ahead, and worrying that something might show up that'll, screw up the system or the plan that they had. So I don't know if we have an answer, but I was just kind of trying to get her an answer.
So one, I hope that he or she participates in public engagement, because I want to hear specifically their concerns to make sure, like, gardens would not be impacted. We would want hand water, like vegetable gardens, trees, fruit gardens, food gardens. It's about turf. It's turf and sprinkler irrigation. So spray irrigation. So drip irrigation could be any time of day. And it's not that they can't water. They can water.
Right. It's just at night. Right.
Yeah.
Okay, great. And the only other question that I thought, if you can answer it quickly, that would just dispel some misunderstanding, right? I emailed you today, thanks for the response, but if you could throw something out quickly for someone. I got a question like, the state isn't mandating that that we do this time of day of the week thing, and they're in fact still giving out water from the aquifer. So how can the city go and do that? Or is it, why isn't the city working backwards by doing something before the state mandates something? So I just didn't know if you had a simple answer for that, in not to steal time from sustainability.
Yeah, so I'll try to have a simple answer. The answer is, one, that the state we do have a regional M&I goal of 20%. That the state, it's not like we're not punished, but certainly we don't want to be behind the rest of the state not meeting our goals. So they are saying conservation is very important. If you want to have your long-term water supply, you need to get real, because you're going to be doing more with less in the future. We all know that's going to be happening. And it's sort of a interesting, I don't know how to say this quickly. The state doesn't micromanage people about specific policies. They just say you need to conserve, and it's up to you, the community, how you reach those goals. And we shouldn't be waiting for a restriction, for a crisis, for us to develop foundational best practices in our community. We don't want to be learning, it reminds me of if we had mask ordinances or mask requirements when people got the flu for this whole time, like they do, in some Asian countries, people were accustomed to wearing masks when they got the flu or SARS or those kinds of things. If we had had that for decades, like those countries had, a mask mandate during this crisis would not have been so controversial, because it would be time tested, it's part of people's lives, they understand that it works, so they would have been bought into it through all this time. And so that's why we want to, it's not just a dress rehearsal for the crisis. but because it does achieve real benefits when we conserve now, but it's also just to develop this ethic of prudent water management in our community.
But Carly, isn't that tied to the fact that we're going to double our population by 2050? I mean, I mean, it might sound like it's a great ethic, but really it's the fact of the goals of growth.
Yeah, and there are regional goals too. So like certain areas are going to grow much more, and so they have different like regional goals. Ours is specific to Moab, and I think it's not just about growth. I think it is about like we have a vulnerable water system. We're facing climate change, drought. We might face a call on the Colorado River. That is probably going to happen in our lifetimes. That means we might take a haircut. A shortage is not outside the realm of possibility, certainly, and just a new future, a new normal is probably likely. So,
I mean, in regards to that, though, I mean, like the Colorado River Pact is going to be renegotiated in a couple of years. I mean, for us to even have us mining water from the Colorado River, I think it doesn't really make sense, because I mean, we can't compete with Denver and with California and Arizona. I mean, that's just not even an option in my mind, in what I've read. Is that incorrect?
I mean, getting into the negotiation of how we figure out how to use the Colorado River, that's a really big discussion. And I mean, each state is doing kind of their own thing. And that's what that new commission is for. And that new commission is going to decide when there's a call where the haircut happens.
Well, and isn't it more important, like when we think about the water use in our valley, like, yeah, we need to know what's going on with the Colorado River, but also we need to know what's happening in Spanish Valley and how much growth is happening there. And we need to think about like whether or not we're going to be asked to annex north, by 313 to deliver water up to a new SITLA development, and just how we have amazing water that melts off of the La Salles and goes into the sandstone fracture, and then is, our drinking water. And that, the two aquifers that we talk about, one's great water and one's briny water, and we don't want to resort to the briny. I mean, I know more about water than I've ever wanted to. And like, it's so critical that we, never, ever get to a place where Moab City has to resort to Colorado River water and that bigger fight with Denver. Like you were saying, Karen, like, heck no, we've got to make sure that the amount of water that we have in the valley, that Moab City, I mean, we're first in line. So we have to protect that.
Well, I mean, I totally appreciate that. It just makes me nervous when we are talking about, having to potentially tap into private wells or, using the Valley Fill aquifer. I mean, because we do not know what's happening with San Juan County. And so to have those as backups, I don't know that that's really viable. That's all I'm.
And how about as a demand policy or a conservation goal, or put it whichever agenda item, there was conversation before I was mayor from the prior mayor that said we need to annex all the way to the end of this valley so that we have a grip over, a grip on how water is managed.
WISA still owns a lot of infrastructure that they have bonds for, and even if we annex, I'm not necessarily going to let that go. So I'm not sure, and they'll still have the water rights. So I'm not sure.
Right.
Yeah. It's a big conversation, an important one.
Yeah, it's good. And it's a good discussion,
but that would manage the development pattern through zoning.
Right. Oh, Mayor, I understand you're saying that we would be able to dictate like landscape requirements, water use requirements, and maybe through that way protect our water interests because other people aren't drawing it down as well. Got it.
Yeah, and then, you know, just like the county is looking at high density housing overlay, you know, and allowing for more development, you know, there's only so much development we allow for. Okay, so it is 7:55 right now. I think we should take a couple minutes break and then a screen break and then come back at 8 and go into sustainability and then budget. So break. It is 8 p.m. We are zooming back in, popping in. Okay, so we are going to start with sustainability, climate goals. We've already been talking conservation goals for water, so we'll probably zoom out and go broader there, and then into budget, and then we're done in an hour. So, excuse me, I'm turning it back over to Carly for, I know, Carly, you are dominating with style tonight. Thank you. You're doing a great job.
So Mike was kind enough to let me know that there's something weird happening with my audio. I apologize. I got that same tip from Kaylin earlier, but I thought I fixed it by adjusting the audio on my Zoom. I'm not sure what's going on. I apologize.
It seems to work better when you lean in closer.
Close. It could be just
You could just do the meeting like, yeah,
okay.
that'll work.
So for sustainability, there isn't much to report from last year. We did, I think there was a report in the materials that we submitted, but I guess I can just do the highlights, which was a greenhouse gas inventory was completed. We've continued with HB 411 and the Utah 100 Communities Group. Ongoing water board management and getting products from them. And I think there's a fourth that's escaping me. Oh, all of our city meters are now on Blue Sky or on subscriber solar. So we have achieved some at least temporary renewable energy as we're developing the Utah Communities option. I also, in your packet, is a list of ideas for things going forward this next year, but I do want to get your input on those, as well as hear what you want communicated to your new sustainability director. And with that, I'll just open up to comments and questions.
Could we talk about the plan? I don't know, Ronnie, if that's what something.
That was my question.
Yeah, because I feel like new director, new plan, and so I know that we had feedback, and I'm assuming that, I don't know, the new director will watch the meeting where we reviewed. I don't even know, does anyone even know what that date was when we reviewed the sustainability plan with our prior director? And we gave a lot of feedback, and then it was like sort of pending draft mode from there moving forward. Do you remember that meeting? I think it was I feel like it might have been a day workshop, but it was definitely pre-COVID.
Yeah, it was in the fall of 19, fall, winter 19.
Fall 19.
That's right.
So, I mean, I would start with that. Ronnie, go ahead with what?
Oh, no, I was just going to ask, yeah, I didn't see the plan in the list in our packet. So yeah, just same question you had.
Well, and Carly, we did talk about the plan after when it was in solid draft form. We'll just call it when it was solidified as a solid draft form. And we talked about a restructuring of it to be more, what's the word I'm looking for? So like where it's looking at a bigger picture as opposed to like recycling bins, it's more about like bigger picture energy goals as opposed to like recycling goals. And that recycling would be informed by energy goals. Maybe somebody else can put it better than I'm putting it. But I think that was, and then the way that it was structured, or even just, we want it to be an editable document. And that we found tricky, that it was in a tricky format, remember? I forgot about that part. Kaylin?
It does seem to be a little dense. It's hard I found it difficult to sort of jump in and figure out like what's next. And I feel like it should be more accessible, especially to citizens, so that they can easily understand, like, where we're going, like you said, at a high level. And then maybe it doesn't need to take so much effort to create it. And then there could be like topic area plans, like a climate action plan. Many communities have that, and so forth.
And I really liked, Joel, what you were saying in yesterday's meeting, where we would be looking at general plan, vision, and sustainability plan as a collective, as opposed to isolated plans from one another.
Yeah, and I think it's really important as we bring in the new sustainability director to them have a look at it. We've begun those interviews. One of the applicants today had actually reviewed it prior to the interview, and they had a lot to say about what they thought of its shape, form. It's like Kaylin just said, they also said that they found that it was cumbersome, and they said that they thought it was outdated to a degree. So I think it definitely needs reviewed, and I think we do it with that larger process with our new sustainability director. We bring it along in that process.
And so then what should we as a council kind of be discussing here at the strategic, besides we're hiring a new director, we're going to be informed by that director what their preferred goals are, how they would like to restructure the sustainability plan, and what more should we be like discussing at this strategic meeting? Ronnie?
Not
Yeah,
to
go ahead, Ronnie.
Not to utter a bad word, it's 5 letters and not 4, but is this a bizarre question? Is noise fit into sustainability? I mean, obviously we've had long discussions about it. I just didn't know if there's a component that fits in here, but.
I would say so. It's a form of environmental pollution. We don't tend to think of it as such, but as I've looked into it more, it's really interesting, like the extent of the health effects. So,
I mean, as big an issue as it is for the community, I guess that was just one of my questions.
Well, quality of life is definitely, I mean, a piece of that. And Kaylin is right. So Oscar and I were doing research actually about the decibel levels. I gave in, and I was willing to learn more. And it really, they're like audible levels. There's, when you look at a decibel meter, there's like the red zone. And so that's actually a health and I do think it fits within a sustainability plan and would be under the guise of a sustainability director and should be goals. Yeah. Mike, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we certainly can do those things. They don't fit within my definition of sustainability, but if you want to broaden the job description, put quality of life issues in, we can talk about that. But what I really want to say was, Carla, here's a laundry list, if you will, of projects I'd like to see a sustainability tackled, because I get questions about it from residents all the time. Everybody wants to blame somebody else for sustainability problems. Residents want to blame hotels. And Ms. Russo, had her own figures on it that said that wasn't the case. So I'd like to get an update on that. I've got other questions from residents about with the growth in overnight accommodations, what percentage of new water resources, for example, is due to commercial growth as opposed to residential growth. And again, that's another kind of related issue. In our overnight accommodation standards, we've currently have a clause that requires 80%, I think it got left at that, on-site renewable energy. The work I did says that's way too optimistic. But let's get an independent verification of that and what we can do to maximize on-site power and not essentially cripple people with requirements that they cannot meet. So that would be a topic. Dave Early, Castle Valley mayor, former mayor, will talk a lot about demand hardening when it comes to water as well. I mean, all the water conservation goals that you guys have enumerated are great, but I suspect Dave would probably tell you it's not going to change much. And I'd like to get an independent research from a scientist on that subject. And finally, recycling. There's still a huge argument going on in town about a separated stream versus single stream recycling, and complaints that, and again, I'd like to get a good scientific unbiased survey on the efficacy of both types of methods, because I can see advantages to both. And I'd like to know more about the markets now. Of course, COVID has upset everything, but COVID will end here in the months to come, and presumably the recycling markets will pick up. But I'd like to find out if the stuff that we're collecting actually is going to find a recyclable home. And so that's something that a sustainability pro could tackle. So that's what would be on my laundry list for what I would expect from someone in that position.
Sustainability also, food, water, shelter, air, energy, quality of life are kind of pillars. I am definitely, I drank the Kool-Aid with regenerative systems thinking as opposed to just sustainability. And it was described like, sustainability is doing things less, kind of working in the less bad system as opposed to regenerative systems. And that's just kind of bigger, but if we look at regenerative systems with each of those pillars, food, water, shelter, air, energy, and quality of life, that's a thing. And I was just, Bill Topper contacted me a little bit ago about conflict between Entrada and Orchard Villa residents, and how that's been a real issue, noise and light pollution coming from a nightly rental, and what can we do? And he said, we're just trying to plant some trees. And I was like, well, I sent him an email back and said, well, just a middle of the night thought here, but Entrada folks that are guests to Moab have a carbon footprint. And I've been talking for a long time about a voluntary carbon offset program. And what that means is if you're traveling to Moab, you can estimate your carbon, the carbon that it takes for you to get here. And then you can voluntarily make a donation into a pot that can offset your carbon. And that pot is usually, with our offsets, is a pot to buy trees. And so I said, well, maybe Entrada people that are coming will buy trees, and then they and the Orchard Villa people can get together on April 30th, Arbor Day, and plant some trees this year. And so creative thinking like that, where we're combining our tourism-based economy and our sustainability goals with creative action items that are regenerative based on those pillars. Walnut Lane is another example of housing, the economic and the social pieces of that, but then also, the materiality of the build as well. Yeah. So then with, just looking back at our agenda, and we've got still 15 minutes to go of this conversation. But knowing that our climate goals and conservation goals also tie into budget, I'm just wondering if we should just give more time to budget than 30 minutes. Thoughts, Ronnie?
I'm okay with that. And I guess one thing, one final thing on sustainability, I guess I'm always interested too if Carly and Joel have suggestions I feel like sometimes when I would talk to Rosemary, she would say it's a bit of a struggle to integrate sustainability into different departments. And I'm sure there are different ways to do it. But it seems like whatever advice you guys have, you know, to build it in as opposed to kind of having it be an afterthought. And I trust you guys on and the new director on what works better there. But anyway, that was just one thing I remembered.
That is absolutely something we saw when I got here, and we've taken a lot of steps to clean that up. When we have put people in new positions, we have addressed it as we've hired or advanced. I don't think that we'll remotely see the pushback that we have historically.
So along those lines, one thing that I was thinking after our meeting on Tuesday was that if we could have some more formal sustainability policies within procurement, it seemed like there might be some opportunities like for bid projects that's part of the information that vendors provide, just whether it's like the setting reasonable and affordable but above minimum standards for fuel and electricity burning equipment or recycled content in office supplies or so forth. And we're small, starting simple, make it simple and easy, but start to integrate that formally into the policies.
I have a question about that. If we start doing it that way, do our RFPs have a component where we get essentially the bid we got and presented to you the other night and the green aspect of it, so we can kind of have both options? Or are we adopting a policy that says sustainability, green infrastructure is the way we're going? We don't care if the cost is 3 times as much. That's what we're doing, so we don't need the other bit.
I would think, given the tightness of the finances, that we'd want to be able to compare cost versus benefits.
And a sustainability filter, right? So we would actually, so with any project, there would be a monetary threshold that would say if something's over a certain amount, then a department head would work with the sustainability director as a filter, right? Right, Kaylin?
Yes, I would think they could help. They could, I mean, depending on the sophistication of the vendors, either the vendor or the sustainability director, or perhaps other staff could also say, yes, the capital cost for this equipment is more, but it saves us much energy and over the time, and therefore money, and over the life of the project. Here's how it balances out, or here's how much it's costing us per ton of carbon, and this is how that compares to other strategies for reducing climate impacts. So that, because cost per greenhouse gas emission saved is a very simple metric to compare actions across a spectrum of activities.
And to be clear on my question, I'm fine either way you want to do it. I just want to bring you back what you're looking for. If what we're saying is going forward, we want the sustainable product regardless, then I don't need to do the other type of bidding. It makes drafting the RFQs and review and everything else a lot easier and a lot less prone to be open to lawsuit when we select our winner. So, it's more of a work product question than a policy question. If we want both and want to split the difference, then we can do that. If we're saying we just want the sustainable product because slowly over time, if we change them out one by one, then slowly we catch up and start getting ahead. I'm fine with either way. I just want clarification as to what you guys would like us to deliver to you.
I'm not prepared to answer that. I cracked into the National Organization of Sustainability Directors Procurement Best Practices Handbook. I didn't make it through all 100-something pages. So I think those are excellent questions. But I'm just pointing out that a reasonable procurement policy might be a way in the next fiscal year to sort of integrate these ideas into city practices.
Is that a real handbook? Are you being serious?
I am being serious.
Wow.
And another question I would have, if we run it through the sustainability director, if we're running RFQs, let's say over $50,000 through sustainability, what type of input are we seeking? Are we seeking that they try and help us, guide us in a way to make sure things are sustainable, or so it's kind of like a NEPA review where we're made aware of what these different stages are and we pick kind of where we fall, or are we running RFPs through sustainability so they build in the sustainability they want and that's what we have to take or accept or use every time?
You know, that's an okay question, but I've heard better.
Well, it's a genuine question. Like, what is the level of review that we're looking for?
Right.
That's what I'm asking.
No, again, that is a good question, but I'm not prepared to answer it. I mean, I think these are great questions for a sustainability director, or like if this is a priority and the sustainability director wanted help, like I'd be happy to look into it more, but I can't answer that right now. I'm not, because I'm aware that staff has very limited time. And so I want it to be, whatever it is, to be economical in implementation.
Yeah, and my concern would only be that if you have like, say, engineering saying that this is the best product for what we're trying to do, it will provide the best service. And I have sustainability saying that may be the best product for service, but this is the best product for sustainability. And it has to pass sustainability for me to get my RFP out. And there becomes this like standoff where one, that's my concern. Is like, we got to head, as we work through this, we got to work through those details of like, what level of approval do we want them to have?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Joel?
I know where you fall in on that question, Chuck.
Well, no, what I was going to suggest is that if it's construction documents, my experience is the time to do it is at like the 30% stage of development, where you evaluate, as an example, we're going to use culvert pipes, or we're going to use subsurface detention basins to increase recharge. And I'm just picking that as a quick example, okay? The time to do that would be to do the cost estimates then, and then make some decisions in concert with the sustainability director or whomever. That's the time to do it. If you go out to, if you build a set of plans based on one thing, it's really hard to put in lots of alternative specs for contractors to bid on. It'll get pretty expensive. I mean, going out and buying things like an air conditioner, it's a lot easier, but in terms of large scale construction projects, the time to do it is at like the 30 to 50% plan stage, and it can be done. And that's where it'll cost money because you're looking at alternatives, but it's less money than later on when you're bidding at the construction phase.
That's interesting.
In my opinion.
Yeah.
And that's good. And I just had one other thought. I mean, maybe we just ask some of the cities we work with most commonly, who we know are killing it in this area, and we ask them how they handle this. And I mean, it may be a money issue where we can't compete because we don't have the money, but I mean, maybe they've already created this wheel and we can copy it.
Okay.
And solar is like an example that is used a lot of the time, where you can say, well, we're going to use this much electricity over and over again and our electric bill go up, or we can make this investment and buy a solar array and rooftop solar, and then we have fixed price and we're paying off debt, and then we've got solar for whatever, so a cost comparison. And the sustainability director would also have access to new shiny things on the market that might actually be more affordable.
Yeah. And
so they can do that background work and that systems thinking work that and be a buddy with staff, instead of, because the scenario you presented, Joel, was like, well, staff doesn't do one thing and sustainability wants to do another. But I actually think that there's just like a together.
Well, and I get that. My question was more is, where does this body, if we have this, is our priority more like the sustainability is outweighing more than economics, or vice versa? Like, kind of like, where do you want us to fall into that a little bit, so we kind of And we can work on that. I don't know that, like Caitlin said, I don't know if that's something we can answer tonight, but you know, that's easily foreseeable that as you start having two separate departments with two separate goals, trying to work on the same project to buy different products to do the same thing, like they could easily both be completely genuine in I need X and I need Y. And at that point, like what's our priority? Is it to provide the service out of the system, or is it to provide sustainability for long-term planning? And they're both acceptable answers. I don't want it to come across like I think one of them is the right or the wrong answer. I don't. I'm
But
more gauging like what direction do you want me to take it if we get to that point.
But it seems like we'd be interested in figuring out when you get that return on your investment. So would it be worth it to go green, or would it, does it not make sense?
Yep.
Can I say what my priorities would be for this new position? Recognizing that being a resort heavy, dominated community driven by transportation, I would like to see if we could offer a car-free accessibility to residents and tourists for the city, because it's environmental pollution, it's noise, it's land use degradation. So offering options that don't require a vehicle through active transportation and through potentially maybe electric shuttle system.
Yeah, I think I agree that transportation is really important. The greenhouse gas inventory showed that. And so not to undermine that, but I also think that private electric vehicle charging is going to be important. Some of the Colorado has a more developed and aggressive transportation electrification plan, which is where many of our visitors come from. And so just to support them so that even if they're car free once they get here, so that they can charge easily and that's not an impediment to visitation, because I think those may also be I won't go there. Never mind. But yeah, like different aspects of transportation I think are important to pursue. So just in terms of the budget, I'm with Rosemarie, as I understand it, she basically we budgeted for her. And then she got a little bit of help from outside organizations, but it seems like whoever the new sustainability director will be will have a very full plate. We have far more on the list of things that we want done than a single person has time for. And so some of that is just coordinating others in the community that will help out, but maybe a need to have some consultant help. So.
Well, and Kaylin, you make a good point. So our new sustainability director is going to come in and say, okay, well, what's my budget? And my response would be, well, as nice as it would be to have flyers and education tools and solar bellies and things like that, I think what we need are policies and resolutions and ordinances and collaboration. And so maybe that's, Kaylin, to what you're saying about, where we're budgeting sustainability too, that maybe it's not outrageous to think, that we are budgeting for a position that will do work that doesn't require a big operational budget, at least for the first year. Because I think there was some frustration where it was like, well, if our sustainability director is spending money, my alarm is going. I don't know why.
Mayor, we can keep going on this. We're fine.
Okay. Yeah, because we're rolling into budget anyway, but yeah, just that I don't know, council, what do you think? If that was the focus of our sustainability director for this first year, and that we're not looking to acquire more signage or do, so there's like, there are projects and policies and programs. And I think what we've been hungry for is policy, which the cost is the person's time as opposed to purchasing things. Council, reaction to that?
I
Ronnie?
mean, go ahead, Mike.
Mayor, it sounds awfully, I think it's well intended, but it's too broad for me to answer that question. I would, if I was brand new coming into this position, I would want to have some months to find out what the heck the town is all about before I'd start writing policies.
Right, but it's just whether or not we're allocating a whole bunch of money for projects as well, or if we're hoping for policy, right, Ronnie?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely feel like the biggest reason for having this position is the looming and, you know, underway climate change crisis. And so I'm most interested in big bang for the buck, high level impacts that we can have, because really the clock is ticking. And we really, I don't feel like we can afford to not focus on the biggest things. So policy and ordinances make sense to me. I guess we'll find out as this develops, like how much, if any, time that person can put aside as a resource, because it does seem like that person is aware of certain opportunities that can be big opportunities, say for someone building a new building or something. And we've talked about things like CPACE and other things that could be a really cool thing on a large scale that could make a difference. So I guess it would be nice if there's some bit where they can at least respond, or and the tools. I mean, you know, we built a website and we have a lot of things in the plan, but it just seems like we would hate to miss opportunities that can help, of sharing information that can help the community as a whole meet some of our climate goals. But yeah, but I think the policies and ordinances could definitely help with that.
So should we be moving into budget at this point? Because we're talking about budgeting for sustainability, but there's bigger budget.
We're all right to, Mayor, well, you guys, it's your meeting, we can do whatever you want, but we have budget stuff we can talk about. It's not gonna take that long. We have budget coming up for the next 3 months that we're gonna be working through. Like, if we want to stay in this for a minute longer, this is really helpful for me. I'm sure it's really helpful for Carly. We really want to set this person up who gets this position for success. And that's the biggest thing. And so the more information you guys provide us that we can pass on to whoever this new employee is, the better off we are. We hear what you're saying about the budget. Carly and I talked about this when we started budget over a month and a half ago, and we had the exact same thoughts as far as the financial side of it. We've been building sustainability's budget as we went along. If you guys recall, when we hired Nora, the planning department had been gutted essentially prior to bringing in Nora. And when the budget had been done that year prior, there was no one up there, and salaries really weren't put into it. No one really built it. No one paid attention. And that first year Nora was here, she had no revenue to do anything. And it was really hard for her. And we do not want to put this person in that same situation. So as Carly and I have been building the budget, doing the budget, I don't want to say any real numbers yet because we're still trying to finalize it. We're working through it. We're probably 2 to 3 weeks away from being there, but it's 6 figures above where it was at the year before when it was at that operational level. So we see the same thing you guys are seeing, and we're kind of preparing that person for when they get here, that they don't have to spend the money because it's there. And if it's in one area, we can move it to another if it needs to go there. But and it's not like large amounts of money, but if you put additional money into professional technical services, which is consultants, and if you put more money into grant expenses so we can match grants, and if we put more money into sustainability projects, and you just put a little bit more in like 5 different categories, that adds up quick. And if that budget, we can put it where we want as we go. And if it's in one item that as direction goes, that's not where we want to be spending it, we can do a line item and move it into another one where we do. So the money just needs to be in there somewhere, and then we can adjust as we go.
Well, and when we're totally what you're saying, Joel, like if this sustainability director is informing a project, for example, that's facilities or MRAC, that's the MRAC budget, that's facilities budget. That's not a sustainability budget thing. That's the way I look at it. And so what we might want to consider is, across the board, as departments are putting together their budget, they might want to have a sustainability contingency if they know, for example, Chuck knows that there are projects where there's going to be green streets infrastructure. He might put like a sustainability contingency, as opposed to having it be in the sustainability budget. Does that make sense?
We don't do it. We do it the exact way you're describing it. So if you guys just approved the HVAC system for the MRAC to last council meeting, that comes out of the facilities or the MRAC's budget. That doesn't come out of sustainability. Those projects aren't associated with them. When we're talking projects in this budget, it is sustainability projects. And I'm not saying this is what they are going forward, but like with our prior director, that project money was used for flyers and pamphlets and things that went into the hotels about water conservation and things that sustainability was doing, or tumblers out at Old City Park, or those purchases that they were making for their projects. That's what we're talking about.
Can I ask Carly? I mean, because she sort of has been the interim position since Rosemary left. I mean, what do you see? I mean, because you've been working with us long enough. I mean, there's a lot of things that we've talked about and I've completely forgotten. So what do you think that would make the most sense for a person going into this position?
You guys have actually hit on the major ones. And then I think it ties into the water discussion too. So let's assume that's all kind of part of it. The one item that I think that is outstanding is dark sky. Getting our certification, I think that would probably be a priority, as well as a plan for our facilities to become dark sky compliant, because we are running out of time on that. So
well, that's like that quality of life pillar, that noise pollution quality of life, dark skies quality of life, sustainability pillar.
You guys, because I thought about this at 3 o'clock in the morning. How many years are we? 2 o'clock? Are we 2 years into?
We are
so we have 3 more years to become compliant.
I think around 3. So we're 2.5 maybe.
We're already 2.5.
Did it keep you up at night because there was a light shining on you?
There's a lot of things from last night that kept me up late at night. Yes.
I really want to talk about something under budget, the revenue enhancement line item, and it's 838. So I'm going to move us into that, if that's okay. I want to ask the council, I want to continue one of the things I was saying at last night's workshop, which was touching on the idea of a property tax. And I want to take the temperature, because that is revenue enhancement. Ronnie?
I mean, I think we've all, if not several of us, said for a while that we thought it was definitely time for discussions about that. If nothing else, we all get more educated about it as a tool and an option, because the best time to discuss an option is when you aren't utterly desperate. So I definitely think it's time for discussion to educate us and the community more about, the things you miss out on when you don't have one, and, how low you could go to start. And that doesn't commit you to anything to start, but I mean, I think we all have been exposed to a lot of the places we're hurting because we don't have anything. So, I mean, I'm well in favor of getting educated and having the discussion.
I'm ready to be assimilated into the Utah norm.
I never wanted to agree with that.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, exactly.
I was just trying to cast it as a neutral light as possible.
I agree with Ronnie. I think it's past the time that we have the discussion about it. I think we've seen how the legislature is going to react to anything that we ask for. If we don't, they're going to tell us to use the tools that we have. And this is a tool that we're not using. And it's not going to be popular. But by the same token, our residents can't ask us to do enforcement on noise and enforcement on speed and improvements to whatever they're asking us to improve, our infrastructure, our roads, our housing stock, and not have some mechanism to fund those. And you know, I talked to one resident a while ago, and it was kind of like, well, we just need a couple of more cops, and maybe we can get some hotels to donate rooms, and that's not the problem. And that's where some residents see the problem area. We've got a much bigger problem in just in law enforcement than a couple of officers. So I don't think that we have educated the public well on how much it costs to run a city, even a small city. So I do think we have to have the discussion.
And I think that education piece has to start with the fact that there are probably a majority of people who already think they are paying a property tax.
They are paying property.
I mean,
tax.
that they're paying, yeah, they're paying a city that they're,
They're just
That
not,
yes.
they're just not paying it to the city.
Yes.
So then for the two of you, like appetite to move forward, 2021, 2022? That's the question.
Well, I would appreciate like an education effort, like the RAP tax. Like, this is what, you know, this is what you get with a property tax. This is, you know, I mean, I think that's a great start.
And I don't know how property taxes are figured, if it's 1% of the property value or 2 or 10, or I don't know how that formula works. So
we will definitely have to do an education on it, because it's not like other taxes where it's 0.1%. It's, if it assess the value of your property, and if it's a primary residence, they tax you at 45% of that value. And at that point, we set our property tax rate, which for most cities is like 0.003, 0.79%. Like we'll have to go through all of it and explain it. It's not like sales tax where just like you look at it and then you multiply it out. It's a formula.
right. So yeah, well, I think we need to start at property tax 101 or dumbbell property tax. I don't know.
I feel like the staff did a really nice job with the RAP tax.
Mm-hmm.
And so I feel like at this point, maybe what we're saying is giving them the go ahead to begin a similar process that they took with the RAP tax, which is researching the details, figuring out what implementation means, having the next conversation with us, and then moving through an iterative process that may or may not go to completion, but at least okaying that staff spend some time on this. We are supportive of learning more about it and its potential to enhance revenue and services.
Joel, and is it also it's a voter? Oh, it's not. Okay.
And so to be clear, Moab City, because we always like, well, there is a property tax. The clear language is Moab property does not assess a property tax. We have a property tax. It's currently set at 0. So we're not assessing a property tax. In order for us to turn that rate up from 0, we have to follow what's called the truth in taxation procedures. And so we just have to have hearings, give notifications, follow that protocol, and I'll go through and lay it all out, just like we did with the RAP tax of what that would look like. But it is not approved by voters. It is approved by the 5 members of this council. And that's not that we would ever turn it around this fast, but going into this budget, if we were going to turn it up right now, which would be almost impossible to do in the next 2 months. I mean, that's not realistic. But if we were going to, what we would do is we would adopt our normal tentative budget like we do it every April, May. And then we would give notice that we intend to increase our tax rate, our property tax rate. We would not adopt a budget in July or in June, June 22nd, like we normally do. We would have to hold that truth and taxation hearing in August. And then we would bring back a finalized budget after that hearing in the end of August and adopt a budget at the end of August. So you would operate under your tentative budget from April, May, depending on when you pass it, through August. And I have worked in cities where we have raised it. It can get a little dicey with jumping from one to another when you've operated under that tentative for so long, but there's just things we'll know what to watch for and make sure we stay square. And it can be done if that's what we want to do. But I would think, you know, for that turnaround, and you can do it mid-year if you want to. There's procedures to do it that way too, and we can lay out that as well. But just to use what we know is coming right now as an example, that's how it would work.
And I would like to share why I'm bringing this forward and why this is a serious conversation for us to have now. Coming out of this pandemic and where we were this time last year with everything shutting down and sitting here thinking like, how are we going to keep our services going? And what are our essential services? And one of them is law enforcement. And if everything else is lost, if all other sales tax is lost, what is the minimum service that we need to provide, you know, as a city? We're not going to be fixing potholes. We're going to be delivering water, and we're going to be providing enforcement. And so having a stable, fixed income slice of our budget for if and when we have another pandemic and we don't bounce back, this is critical. This is critical. You don't think so, Mike? You don't think it's critical to have
It's highly unlikely we're going to have another pandemic next year. That's correct.
Not a pandemic, a something else, a something unforeseen. I mean, when we look at our own finances, we always think, well, what's my dependable source of income? Right? And so for the city to be 100% dependent on sales tax, it's.
Okay. So may I put in my 2 bits worth, Mayor?
Yeah.
Yeah. Education, yes. The RAP tax is a whole different deal. It passed easily because somebody else paid the bills, A, and B, we enjoyed the benefits. That's why it was such an easy sell. This tax is not that. Your average Joe Blow on the street is going to say, you're going to hit me with another tax for which we really can elect to ignore public opinion. We just have the truth and taxation hearing, and we do whatever we damn well please. All right, we can make all these arguments. Another data point on the whole thing is a few years ago, the school board, after several unsuccessful tries, trying to raise teacher salaries and so forth, finally did a spectacular good job of explaining why a particular tax raise, exactly what it paid for, what it bought residents, why it improved education, where the money was going to go, exactly what they were going to spend, and because they did a great sales job, which is along the lines of what we're talking about here, it passed. So we can do it, but it demands all those kinds of things. I got to say, I'm going to say something unpopular here with you guys, but I'm going to say it anyway. I'm an environmentalist also. All right. I mean, I want a sustainable planet as much as the rest of you guys do, but it's always a hard sell position because it's, if you had to eliminate some position in terms of the fundamental things that a city provides in the way of services, sustainability comes in last place. Okay. And Ronnie, as much as I appreciate your concern about global climate warming, frankly, it's a global phenomenon. What we do here in the city, other than in trying to encourage people to think globally, doesn't matter squat. China's burning a world of coal. That's where global climate warming is coming from, and we can't do anything about it. So I'm just trying to infect you guys with a dose of reality here and try to look at this the way many of your taxpayers are going to look. And so I think we can sell it, but I'm not going to feel comfortable ramming it down people's throats unless I feel comfortable that if we've made it clear to the public exactly what they're getting and why this is a good thing for them.
I don't think anyone's suggesting ramming now or even saying if they voted today that they would vote for it. I think what we're saying is we'd love to be educated about it as a tool and how it works and go from there.
And additionally, Mike, you're looking at it as a closed system. And one of the things, if we were to implement a very small property tax, it would afford us with the opportunity to look at annexation of surrounding neighborhoods that have been underserved, like the Holyoke neighborhood, for example, that have been underserved just by not having access to certain services that the city would otherwise provide them. So, just because that would give us, that would inform our budget to be able to also look at different annexation strategies as well.
Okay, well, that's fine. That's another argument you ought to make, Mayor. But we'll have to do a good sales job.
Well, and we'll have to believe in the product that we're selling. And so that's really what I think I'm hearing consensus about the education, to make sure that if we were going to move forward with a property tax, that we need to be informed as a council, because we're going to need to be informing the community alongside us, right?
Mhm.
But it's a big deal, and it's going to be bigger than a bike skills park and bigger than back in Engle parking. And it's a heavy lift from staff. And it's going to be a lot of groundwork for all of us in communicating with our constituents. But what I'm hearing from the council is that moving forward is with an outline of what a property, so we would be putting on our agenda, property tax.
Was that on our list, Mayor?
Yeah, budget revenue enhancement.
No, not here. Carly's long list of yesterday.
Good question. No.
So what would we have to take off? Because how much of a heavy lift would it be for staff?
We don't have to take off anything for that. We can handle that without taking anything off. I prepared all the outlines and did it all for the RAB tax, and I can do that on my time. I can figure out how to make that happen at my time.
Joel, do you want to share your thoughts on it? Like, what are you thinking about it?
I think you guys all make excellent points, and I think education is the way to go and to fill it out with the constituency and what we need to do. The points the mayor makes are very valid, and the points Mike makes are very valid. The annexation is absolutely pointless without a property tax. You're taking on more properties that you have to provide essential services to that pay you absolutely no revenue. And I've annexed a lot of acres of property in the years I've done this, did very large annexations for other cities. And if this council asked me to start annexing property, I would advise them to not annex anything without a property tax. It's just taking on more debt that you can't pay for. And so I think if you have an annexation argument, I think that's something we really need to point out. The mayor's argument for sewer, water, and police in times of crises is really important. I can always fund sewer and I can always fund water through the enterprise fund that they self-generate. April and May, when we had zero revenue, I had no way of funding police if that would have sustained out longer. And so it is a concern that you don't have a second revenue source, and to be diversified is important. That said, we don't want to tax for the sake of taxing. And we need to live within our means and be very fiscally responsible. And I think that we've shown over the last 2 years that we're able to do that here. And we definitely are living within our means. But the points Tani makes, we need more. When people say we need more police and we need more this and we need more that service, this is what a free institution provides you. When there's no tax being paid, this is about what we can do. And if we want to do more, it costs more, and that has to be paid for somewhere. Everything we do has a cost associated with it. It's no different than someone else's home. We're running a business. And so if we want to provide more policing and we want to provide more services, it costs more. And revenue. So right now, where we don't have that second revenue stream, it's like I said yesterday, we will figure out where to cut it out to make it work. But that's what we're doing right now. If we start providing services in A, then they're coming out of B, because we're providing the services we can with the revenue we have. So as we go into policing and provide more policing to get red light and everything else we talked about, that's great. But we now will go in, Carly and I, as we do the budget, we will prioritize out things to make that cost be able to move into policing. And so that's where we're at right now. We don't have the luxury of saying, oh, well, we have this revenue stream we can rely on that we can do this with this year. And that it makes it hard to do our job, and that's okay. It doesn't need to change. The city's run without it for 30 years. We'll run without it for as long as we need to. But if the demand is we need more, then that comes with a price tag. And I had this conversation with several people in the community, and they say, yeah, but I pay taxes. I pay sales tax, and you get sales tax, and that's true. But every member of the community, when I worked in other cities, they paid sales tax where they lived too. They bought groceries and food where they lived too, and they paid sales tax where they lived, and they paid a property tax. So you're still getting a great deal, because sales tax that you pay does not remotely come out to what property tax is for that community. So I understand that people here pay taxes, and I understand people here are paying us a portion of sales tax that we're receiving. I don't want to act like people here aren't paying taxes, but they are not paying a proportionate share that every other resident in this state is paying. And I will tell you guys, as you know, is I went, and the mayor went to the legislature from July through October and said, we have no revenue. We're sales tax driven, and you closed everything and we have nothing coming in. I got told more than once, you don't want to charge your people what it costs to provide your services. You want everyone else in Utah to give you money to do it. Go back and turn your property tax on and make your residents pay for what they're getting, and then come back and ask for appropriation. We got told that how many times, Mayor?
Well, and that's why, I mean, the education has to be really comprehensive, because it's so much more than just whether or not residents pay the tax, but it's the bigger system of where we're seated as a resort community and not collecting property tax.
And the other thing is, when people pay their property tax to the assessor and they pay $2,000 or $1,500, that is a pie that gets proportioned out to everyone. The city's proportion of any property tax would be anywhere from $125 to $300 a year per house, per property. I mean, it's less than it's like 50 cents a day. Maybe it might not even be that much.
And we could roll it in at a very small percentage to begin.
So we want to be clear when we talk to everyone and we present this, that we're not talking about thousands of dollars. We're talking of cents per day, like less than $1 a day. And when we increased it, the last time I increased it at a city was in 2018, and we increased it to a percentage, but it ended up coming to people in that city were paying about $360 per year for the household. And we went to council and we brought in a grate from the street, from the curb that we put in at the corner where the sewer or the water, the stormwater runs in. And that grate alone was $400. You know, we brought in a taser from the police department. That taser alone was $250. We brought in a pair of boots from our fire department. Those boots alone were $400. We made the point that the average home property tax doesn't buy us a pair of boots. That's the type of,
needs question, Joel.
Yeah.
And it's because it's late. If this were to happen, does the city use the county's assessed value, or would we have to create an assessor's department?
Nope, it'll work just like it will be no different than mosquito abatement. We turn our rate into the county, it goes through their assessors, that goes out on the county tax bill, they collect it through the state, they then give us our portion.
Okay.
Ronnie, you've better ask your question right now.
Okay, it's gonna be real fast. Were there any other revenue enhancements that we were supposed to be hearing about? And then will we have a future time to discuss the police department, news we got yesterday that we're down some officers, And I really appreciated the retreat. I thought it was good. I was glad to hear from several departments, but I realized there were ones who weren't personally represented, and they're going to have their asks for us too. So will we hear those asks in the budget?
Absolutely.
Sorry, that was a 3-part. So the other parts were just
Real quick, I
revenue.
will make sure everyone gets updated on the police information within the next 12 hours, tomorrow before 10 a.m. We'll say 11 a.m. And I will just call you. It's the easiest way to relay this much information. And then the other revenue is impact fees. And the impact fee areas we're looking at were public safety, streets, roads and transportation, parks, recs, and open spaces. So that's the other area of revenue we're looking to start generating. And then the other one was property tax, which the mayor just opened with.
So it's 9:01 and we said we were going to stop. We've got budget season that we're going into. So I just wanted to end tonight with a heads up that I think, so our next meeting is public hearing heavy. And so we need to really be prepared to allocate a good amount of time for public hearing. And then just a few agenda items. But one thing that we do want to do at the next meeting too is get an outline and a structure of budget scheduling, because now we're in March. So Joel, is that something that we can get for our next meeting? Not next week, but the week after.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. So, and then otherwise we are not meeting again for a few days. So not next week, but the week after. So this has been a marathon of 3 nights. And I just want to say thank you to staff and council for coming together and running the marathon. And we certainly don't ever have enough time to do any, to talk about all the things we want to, but I think we did a really good job of hitting our priorities. So thank you all. Much appreciated. And good night.
Guys, bye-bye.
Bye.